Go ahead and record. Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Fablab Funding for AIS Greeter and Management Programs. I'm Pat Swazi. I'm the president of Fablab. As you all know, AIS is a danger to Vermont's lakes and ponds, but AIS is not only a serious environmental threat, it is also a threat to our state's economy, which relies heavily on the tourism that our beautiful and pristine waters bring in. Adequate funding is vital to combating this threat, yet such funding is always tight and could potentially become tighter. So this program is intended to provide a broad discussion of funding options and ways to address the issue. I want to thank Jackie Sprague, Fablab Vice President and Events Committee Chair, and the entire Events Committee for their work on organizing this program. I especially want to thank Jack Widnes, Chair of the Fablab Ad Hoc AIS Water Quality Committee, and that entire committee for coming up with the idea for this program and working so hard to make it happen. Finally, and very importantly, a huge shout out and thanks to all of you, nearly all of you who are volunteers, who are so committed and who have for so many years worked diligently to protect and preserve Vermont's precious lakes, ponds, and watersheds. Many, many thanks. And that's all I'm going to say. Enjoy the program. I'm going to turn the program over to Jack.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming. This has been a long time in thinking and developing, and I'd just like to say that our ad hoc committee on AIS and water quality, which has just come together under the new leadership of Pat and others at Fablab, we hope will be of benefit. And then I think this is one of the first things we've done. As some of you know, we did a survey last summer. Dave, can you, if people could mute, that would be great. I was saying that our hope is to do things that are very practical for not just Fablab members, but all lakes and ponds in Vermont. And this is our first effort to do that. We're planning another one this spring if this is successful, but we'll focus on Vermont invasive patrollers. But we're really delighted that you're here today, and we hope that you benefit from what I see as a very timely topic because our reader applications are due, and thinking about how to fund them, I think, is something that is important and you can all potentially benefit from. I did want to go over a couple of housekeeping items to remind you that this, as you know, this is being videotaped and we plan to show this later. I think we'll also be making the PowerPoints available to you if you'd like to have those. During the meeting, if you're not speaking, stay muted. That would really be appreciated, as it will help us a great deal. If you have questions, and we hope you do, we would invite you to enter them into the chat box. Someone will be looking at that. And then we will have plenty of time for questions after each of the presentations. And also at the end of the day, beginning at 11:20 after our roundtable, we'll have more time for questions that we didn't get to earlier in the day. So I would just have you think about that. Also at the very end, there will be a chat box with questions about what you thought about today's survey. It's very simple, and we hope that you'll take a minute and respond to that. The speakers will be sharing their slides. Dave and Pat will be helping if we need to. So welcome. Let's get started. I think we're going to have an interesting day, and we welcome your attendance, attention, and questions. So Dave's our first speaker, but our moderator, Glenn Schwartz, is going to step in now and introduce him.
Good morning, everybody. Our first speaker is Dave Johnson. He's a Fablab director, and his topic that he's going to be going over is the overview of the 2021 AIS survey. So, Dave? Dave, you're muted. Dave, you're still muted.
Okay, I figured it
There
out.
we go.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yep.
sorry about that. As Jack mentioned, about a year ago, a group of lake lovers in Vermont thought it would be a good idea to create a contact list of folks dealing with aquatic invasive species. And once we got that list together with the help of the state and also a Fablab and many phone calls, we decided to use that contact list to send a Google survey out to the various folks. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today. So thank you to those who responded. The intent of the survey was to enhance communication between groups dealing with aquatic invasive species. The survey was sent to 71 lake associations and contacts, and it was open between May and July last summer. We covered greeter programs, AIS management programs, patroller programs, and other lake topics, as you'll see. And one of the first questions was, are you a member of Fablab? And about 3/4 of the responders said that yes, their associations were members. Then we went into greeter programs. About half of those who responded had greeter programs, and of those, about half had shelters, and only about 30% or so had wash stations. Then we had detailed questions about various aspects of the greeter programs, and I summarized those in this table where I give the range of answers and also the average values. So the age of the programs range from 1 to 20 years, and these numbers applied to the 2020 season. So some lakes spent up to almost $40,000 on the greeter programs, inspecting over 2,000 boats in some cases. Number of funding sources ranged from 1 to 4, with an average being about a little over 2. There were up to 10 paid staff on these programs. And then, and they covered up to 80 hours or 84 hours a week. And during the 2020 season, in some cases, there were up to 350 volunteer hours at the launch site, and many more volunteer hours away from the launch site to enable these programs. Then we got shifted into management, and about half of the responders had milfoil management programs, and they employed various techniques. About 3/4 of them used hand pulling. A little less or a little more than half had diver assisted suction harvesting dash programs. About 30% had mechanical harvesting, and a little over about 60% had bottom barriers. And I have to move something on my desktop here. About 17% used herbicides. And we asked about yearly expenditures for milfoil control, and it went up to over $200,000 a year in some cases. There were, here again, there were multiple funding sources typically, and volunteer hours ranged up to 500 hours per year for milfoil control. We had one lake that reported a zebra mussel management effort, but gave no details on that effort. Then we asked about patroller programs for just monitoring whether the lake has aquatic invasive species. And we asked what species had been found, and these were the species that the people reported. Only about 24% of the lakes, 24% of the lakes had a volunteer invasive patroller program. But for those who did not have it, most of those lakes would be very interested in having such a program. And Fablab is planning another half-day remote meeting sometime early spring, I believe, to talk about patroller programs. So stay tuned for that. There's a lot more detail that we gathered in this survey, and those who participated got a link to a spreadsheet with all of the responses, including contact information. And so we certainly encourage folks to use this information to reach out to other lakes with similar problems and hopefully, make their own programs more effective as a result. We use this opportunity to ask what other topics people would like to see investigated through surveys like this. And you can see that there was a lot of interest in these topics for future surveys. And finally, we asked about whether there be more, people would like more information on funding opportunities for AIS prevention. And we got a lot of interest in that. And that is one of the reasons we're having this seminar today. There's also interest in learning more about possible legislation to require AIS stickers for out-of-state boats and potentially for non-motorized boats. And that concludes my talk.
All right, Dave, thank you. You're a little under time, so give us a little more time for questions. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Anything in the chat box at this point? Okay, again, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the meeting.
So excuse me, just a quick question. Is the material that was presented, is that going to be available? Like, could it be sent to the participants here or a way to download that?
Yes, we'll have all the slides available.
Thank you.
And the meeting is being recorded, so that'll be available also. Are there any other questions?
There's nothing in the chat box.
Okay. So at this point, is Oliver on?
Yes.
Okay, Oliver is on. Okay, great. So our next speaker is Oliver Pearson. He's a Vermont DEC Lakes and Ponds Director, and he's going to be discussing AIS funding, the horizon from DEC. So Oliver. Oliver, you're still muted.
He was in another meeting prior to this, so he may still be in the meeting and just has both meetings kind of simultaneously going.
All right, well, Kim, do you want to go first then, or?
Sure.
Okay, well then we'll go with Kim Jensen, who is the Aquatic Invasive Species Manager for Vermont DEC. And she's going to be discussing the overview of AIS funding sources. So Kim, take it away. Now, did we lose Kim?
No, I'm just trying to upload my presentation.
You should,
Okay,
Kim, you should be able to share your screen.
there we
Yep.
go.
So let's see. Too many things open on my desktop. So can you see my screen yet or no?
No.
Okay. There we go. You should be seeing it now. It's coming over from Elmore.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me to talk about funding opportunities for aquatic invasive species projects. And I appreciate all the work, especially with the survey that you did. It's interesting. I was trying to figure out like who was responding and some of the outliers of those survey questions. So it's really interesting to see the respondents and the percentages. I think they're pretty spot on. And I also just wanted to point out in the future, you know, we do hope to be more involved, especially with the patrollers, Vermont invasive patrollers. We are developing Vermont invasive patrollers for animals projects. I just wanted to mention that before I forgot. So thanks again for having me. And
Hey, Kim, I'm back. Sorry, I thought I was
Oh.
starting at 9:25. So I guess I can either go now or go after you, whatever folks prefer. I wasn't aware that my time had been bumped up.
Oliver, if you don't mind, we'll let Kim go first. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, Kim.
okay. I'm just trying to figure out, I have 3 screens open on my desktop, so I'm just trying to figure out which one you're seeing. Wait, it's this one.
We can see your cursor now.
Okay, so are you seeing my presentation slides or just the presentation itself? Are you seeing my notes page? Just making sure.
No, we're not seeing notes.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. So the state of Vermont has a motorboat registration fund, as probably most of you know, but I think some don't know. So that's why I thought I would just provide kind of the background for the Aquatic Nuisance Control Program. And so we receive funds from motorboat registration fees. And this is the statute here. And hopefully I can have this presentation available for you in the future if you want to refer to it and dive deeper into the statutes. But basically, the motorboat registration funds are a special fund, and it was developed to protect and maintain the state's water resources. Of those motorboat registration fees, there's different percentages that are provided to different departments or divisions within the state of Vermont, and those are listed here. Highlighted are the percentages that go to the Aquatic Nuisance Control Program, and that's 17% to the DEC for the purpose of aquatic nuisance control. And that's basically for adding funds to personnel costs. And so that's what pays my salary. And then 20% of the funds goes to the Aquatic Nuisance Grant Program. And in the past, 37%, all of those funds did go into the Aquatic Nuisance Control Grants and Aid Program. When I was hired, they did provide MBR funds for my salary. So that's a continuation. And then last year, additional personnel staff were also taking funds from that. And so that's for the aquatic nuisance control permitting people. So we have about $450,000 that are provided to us each year. And we're also drawing some surplus funds. And I think Oliver is going to talk about, so I'm not going to talk about those funds. So the statutes also call out the Aquatic Nuisance Control Grant and Aid Program very specifically, and how the funds are then prioritized and provided to municipalities and state agencies. So in the beginning, when this was effective in 1994, the statute calls out may award a grant of 75% or less for projects. And I believe when this program first started, there was about 10 to 12 applicants. And so those applicants received a bulk of their total project cost, 75%. And you probably also all know that what those priorities are, because they are listed in the applications that all of you apply for. So the use of the waters by persons outside the municipality in which the waters are located is a priority. The long-range effect of the control project is a priority, and the recreational use of the waters. So we don't generally fund projects that go to private ponds, for example. That just would not meet the eligibility priorities for the grant. And also below, it mentions even more priorities of how those funds are kind of expended. That the priorities go to new infestation waterways. The second priority is to prevent or control the further spread of aquatic nuisances. So those are greeter programs. And the third priority is for recurring maintenance projects. Those are those ongoing Eurasia water milfoil, basically projects that are found in Vermont. So we score the grants based on these priorities, and we also expend the funds and based on those priorities. So we also have a funding source that we refer to a lot in the Army Corps of Engineers federal grant APCP program. And it was established in 1982, thanks to the good work of people who wrote a federal grant. And when we first worked with the Army Corps of Engineers, that is in the Lake Champlain Basin only, and it's a regional grant basically. So it funded Lake Champlain Basin projects only. We received about $90,000 in the 1990s, and now it's up to $500,000. And we have to, the state of Vermont has to match those funds 100%. So if we receive $500,000, then the state of Vermont has to match it $500,000. So we match those funds with the Mbra funds. And we also used to match those funds with general funds that we received. And those general funds went to personnel and water chestnut management. The Army Corps of Engineers also was very invested in water chestnut management too, because part of the funds have to go towards navigation purposes for opening waterways. So right now, about half of the funds goes to water chestnut management and half goes to the aquatic nuisance control grant and aid projects. So in doing so, they also have to match too. So initially the funds were provided for Eurasia water milfoil control projects and water chestnut management just in Lake Champlain Basin. But we received permission to kind of open up that geographic region. So some of the funds could go towards greeter projects throughout Vermont, and a portion of the match could also be provided by municipalities. So quite different from the start, because the state of Vermont had to match the funds with state money. And now we have been provided the ability to provide some of that match from municipalities. So it's quite different from when it started. We also had some surplus funds provided in the 2000s to complement the Anc Grant Projects. Again, I think Oliver is going to talk about that. It's also good to talk about this. So we have a bit of some overlap, probably with Oliver. So as I mentioned, when the grants started, we had a few applicants who were applying, and so we had a lot more funds available. But over time, that has gone up tremendously, and the amount of funds has remained pretty consistent since the 2000s. So it's around $300 to $400,000, while the amount of people who apply and who also have larger needs has also increased. So in 2019, we had a almost $2.5 million request for the funds. And that has gone down a little bit just because we're trying to determine the real costs of the projects. And so that is kind of going down a little bit based on realistic expectations for projects. So you will also see a dip in the Anc Grant participants in 2018, because that's when we opened it up to regional partners. And so more people applied under that new kind of establishment of regional partners and helping get partners to do these projects. So we had an increase due to that factor. So we do get more requests each year, and it's certainly a challenge administratively to have so many participants. And again, we fund all of eligible projects. So we have not made this a competitive grant system. We provide grants for everybody who applies, and that portion gets less and less each year as more people apply. And how that breaks up. So this is a bit complicated, but I thought this would be interesting for you to see. So this is the proposed total project cost from last year, broken into their different categories. And the green is the education outreach projects. The blue is the education outreach projects. The green is the greeter projects. And the orange is the control projects. I also should mention, in the past, projects came in that may have had all three of these particular projects in one application. And we thought it would be easier to score and easier to provide funds if we broke the projects out. And so that's what we did a few years ago. So we can see what the real costs were for each of these priority projects. So this is a great graph that demonstrates those particular costs. The final total project costs from last year obviously are less, because people expect that they're going to do a certain job, and then they may not get enough funds, or they may lose a contractor, or something happens over the season. And so the final total project costs are a bit reduced, but yet the ratio is still about the same. How the projects are awarded the funds are here. So you can see that only a portion of education outreach survey projects are funded, and that's because those projects are very specific to the needs for the program. So there are scientific studies, there are surveys, and some of those funds are actually looped into the greeter program. So if a greeter program also wants to do a survey, rather than separating that out and having yet another project that somebody has to report on, we just kind of group that into the greeter program. Or the same thing with a survey with a control project. If somebody wants a survey, that project is just folded into the control project. So even though the education outreach survey projects looks like they're not getting as much funding, they are just folded into those other projects. And that blue line is really for the scientific studies that help me do my job. So You can see the Anc Awards are kind of half and half for the greeter projects and the control projects. And that is based on those priorities in statute. So half of the funds go to those early detection projects, and then half go to long-term maintenance projects. And then you can see where the match comes in. So the match for greeter programs is about the same as what goes out. So about 50% of grant projects that are greeter programs are matched about 50%. And those control programs are a bit higher, well, a lot higher. So there's a lot more work going on for control projects.
Kim, if you could start wrapping it up, we're running a little long, but okay.
Okay, yep.
It's important stuff, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the way that the Army Corps of Engineer funds are applied is here, and so a lot of the greeter projects are funded, and only a few control projects, and then the Mbra funds are applied half and half, pretty much as well. And then future opportunities. Really, the Watershed Grant is one that some people do apply for. It's really for education and outreach projects. Only a few people apply each year to that. It's very competitive. And then Lake Champlain Basin Program, AIS grants, you know, that Meg is going to be talking about. That is really for Champlain Basin projects only. Again, that's a competitive project. The future, we were hoping to increase Army Corps of Engineer funds, but it's highly unlikely due to the match requirements that I talked about. And then also in the future, I hope to develop a aquatic nuisance species plan through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where we potentially can get additional funds for greeter programs and EDR projects, but not a lot of money. So that's maybe $90,000. So that's my comments, and I will stop the slideshow so I can get back to you.
Okay, Kim, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Kim? I'm sure somebody must have a question.
There's one question in the chat box from Dave Johnson. You mentioned that all the projects were funded. Is the scoring used to determine the amount of the grant award?
So all the projects are funded, and the scoring is used to determine the amount of the grant award, but also the percentage for all of the projects in that category are divvied up equally, and then the scores then affect how much you get. So the control projects are funded around 20%, but maybe less or a wee bit more, depending on how you scored. The greeter projects are funded at about 30% of the proposed total project cost, I should mention. Then those percentages may change a wee bit based on your scores.
So Kim, this is Jack. I had a question about the fees that come from the motorboat registration as you presented them. Are there opportunities over time that those percentages change? Does that get discussed? Certainly things happen over time, as you pointed out, and you've made modifications in some of the other ways that things get distributed. But is that something that, as they say, that discussion goes into, should adjustments and be made in that? Because it seems like the need for AIS, based on the people that are applying, is far, far exceeding what the capacity of the DEC is to provide that sort of funding, so that it's becoming, you know, more of an issue. But are these rethought and reapportioned?
That would make that would be a legislative change, and so I think everyone who gets a percentage of that would have to be involved in that conversation. And I'm not sure how they came up with those percentages initially, But certainly I think that would be a very large challenge. So we don't discuss it in our program. And perhaps that's a good question for Oliver as well. So yeah, we don't really discuss how we can change that within the division ourselves.
So a follow-up is part of that. In terms of new funds, one of the things that I couldn't see that you mentioned was the state of Vermont providing increasing funding. And I think what you're alluding to now is that this comes from the legislature. And I would think the legislature is responsible and responsive to the citizenry. So are there things that lake owners or lake associations or Fablab could do to encourage the state to recognize the need here and consider additional funds?
Yeah, I think that would be to talk to your state rep and to, bring that conversation to them. It's really hard for me to advocate for that since basically I work for them. So I think that's a conversation, that Oliver might be able to respond to as well.
Thank you.
All right, Chris, I see there's a bunch of things in the chat box if you want to.
Yeah, okay. So Kim, we have from Martha Prophet, I'm sure I got that right, from Lake St. Catherine. She was wondering, the importance of the AIS prevention. Can the influx of money from the American Rescue Plan revenues in Vermont find their way into the AIS prevention program? Everybody would like that to happen, but
Yeah, I think there is some funds that's earmarked for AIS projects, but it's equipment only. So there's no funds for prevention programs such as breeder programs, but there is funds that if you would want a decon station, then you can potentially get a decon station. So that's some conversations that we're having with some folks here in Fablab and in our division as well.
okay, thank you. And then there's a question from the Friends of the Waterbury Reservoir. I guess it's more of just a request. Is it possible to get the breeder program training scheduled earlier in the year? And I guess with that is do you have a schedule maybe you can put up for the grant schedule for next year?
No, we're still working on the grants application. I apologize for the delay, and I've apologized for the delay, I think, every year. We have had some turnover in the business office, and we're attempting to go through that application package and hopefully finalize it tomorrow. So I apologize that it's late, but I hope to get it out as soon as possible. And then it's going to be a quick turnaround time so that we can award the projects quickly for springtime. And so the training has always been around April, May, and that's really been challenging for me because I hope to have help by then because I have so many other responsibilities, and it's really about doing the training when I have the ability to do the training and the time to do the training. So I can be hopeful that I have staff to help in April and that we can have the training sooner than we have had it in the past. So we can do our best with making that as early as possible.
Okay, thanks very much, Kim. And then Bruce Durgans, he has a question. I guess where in Vermont are water chestnuts a problem to justify $250,000 from the Corps of Engineers grant?
So we have a huge water chestnut problem throughout the Lake Champlain Basin, all the way up to Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge down to South Lake area where it is a mat, and we have a huge water chestnut management program. That's actually $450,000 worth of work. So that's the other portion of my responsibility is making sure that South Lake is passable, because without this work, it would not be passable. So if you would like to learn more about the Water Chestnut program, I'm more than happy to provide that information for you.
Okay. And thanks, Kim. And then we have one last question from Dave Johnson. Do municipalities know that their contributions to the AIS control may be matched by the Army Corps of Engineers funding?
Yes, based on your grant agreement, it says where the grants are normally funded. And in the past, we actually had a kind of a statement in the grant agreement saying where your funds come from and that this is a federal match. And that's why we've also been very particular about in-kind costs or matching funds, that they have to be eligible funds. So we do mention about that in the grant agreements and in the manual.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Kim. Glenn, that's about all the questions there are right now.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Kim. If anybody has any questions at the end, I don't know if Kim will be available, but we are going to have question and answer at the end of the program. So we're going to jump back now. If Oliver is available, we'll assume that he is. And once again, Oliver is the Vermont DEC Lakes and Ponds Director, and he's going to be discussing AIS funding, the horizon for DEC. So Oliver, you can take it from here.
Great. Morning, everyone. Nice to be speaking to you this morning. Again, I'm Oliver, the program manager at DC. I work closely with Kim on our aquatic invasive species and management program.
Oliver, you're a little hard to hear. Is there, can you speak up or?
Sure. Yeah, I also work with our aquatic nuisance control permitting program, and I think I was asked to speak about sort of general trends, conditions, horizon for aquatic invasive species program funding. Some of this Kim already covered. As she mentioned, there's a bit of overlap, so I might zip through some of these slides quickly and leave time more for questions and discussion to the extent that that's useful for today's program. So stepping back a bit, as folks know, we coordinate all the management activities associated with aquatic invasive and aquatic nuisance species in the state of Vermont at DEC Lakes and Ponds. Work with lots of partners, have various funding sources, different ways to provide funding for control projects and education. And much of this work, as folks know, and Kim I think showed, was created under statute, which is just a nice reminder that this work we're all here to talk about today does have some statutory backbone to it in Vermont, particularly about aquatic nuisance control permitting, prohibitions on transport of AIS, the whole clean, drain, dry thing, as well as other aspects of this. So what we do at DEC is a variety of tasks. You know, this is what Kim and Misha Setner, who does the permitting, lead up, but it's anything from permitting to early detection and rapid response of new aquatic invasive species or new water bodies that have recently been newly colonized, if you will, by existing aquatic invasive species. There's a fair amount of statewide monitoring and surveying that goes on. We do the grant and aid program, spread prevention projects, et cetera. You know, the staffing picture over the last 5 or 6 years has been one of decrease. The acronym FTEs, basically that stands for full-time equivalent, but it's basically a full-time staff position at Vermont DEC. So back in 2017, we had 3 full-time equivalent staff members, and that shouldn't be at techs, that should be 2 techs, and by tech we mean a summer technician helping us out for a short period of time, usually up to 6 months. We were reduced by 1 full-time equivalent position down to 2, and then we increased our tech and interns as a result. And more recently, we've been reduced to 1. Our current scenario is 1 full-time equivalent. That actually happened in 2019 with the departure of Josh Mulholland. So since 2019, we've essentially had just Kim Jensen as the only full-time person working on aquatic invasive species prevention and management in the state. Now we also have a person doing the aquatic nuisance control permitting. That's Misha Setner. And we staff up with interns, technicians, and AmeriCorps placements, which are 6-month volunteers, maybe even longer, 9-month volunteers as well. So, our staffing is reduced compared to previous years, but we're making do, and we're always advocating and trying to encourage the DEC and A&R leadership to restore some of our full-time positions that we've lost. So this is what we're focused on. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but it's just good for folks to know what we're talking about here. We've already had discussion of water chestnut, milfoil. Some of we're lucky that only a few of our water bodies have zebra mussels so far, but that could change over time. And some of the other offenders in terms of aquatic invasive species, both plant and animal, are shown in this slide. And we think a lot about how these species can cause harm to the environment, to the economy, and in some cases, human health. We don't really consider cyanobacteria invasive. It can be considered a nuisance. I'm sure folks would agree with that. So we do some permitting related to cyanobacteria management, but that's basically handled separately and outside of the aquatic invasive species program. What we're looking at really is a situation where we believe that the number of threats in terms of new aquatic invasive species are increasing. We know that adjacent to Vermont are water bodies with species that we don't have but might be heading our direction because they're interconnected via existing waterways. An example of that is the round goby that's spreading in our direction, and hydrilla is kind of coming up north through the Connecticut River and perhaps other water bodies. So there is this situation where we're looking at increased threats to our water bodies over time, and we for many of these invasive species, eradication is no longer an option. So how do we live with them? How do we limit and prevent the spread? How do we allow our designated uses in our water bodies to continue and be maintained at a good, very good, or excellent level, in spite of the presence of invasive species like milfoil and water chestnut? So that's really where we are with the ones that are established. If we can prevent arrivals and through early detection, rapid response, so they suppress and eradicate expansion of existing species to new water bodies, we'll invest some time and energy there as well. Late last year, we were working with Chrissy Kano, who I believe is on the call, to sort of make the case that additional funding for aquatic invasive species prevention and management work in the state is needed. I think some of the funding sources Kim talked about maybe 10, 15 years ago were adequate to address the issues. Probably never adequate, but we got along okay. Now, these funding sources have really plateaued, stayed constant, but the demand is increasing dramatically. The number of species we're dealing with and the spread of those species is also shown to be increasing in Vermont. And so we're probably entering a period of time where the existing plateaued funding sources are going to be very inadequate to meet the demands and the needs to limit the spread of aquatic invasive species. And so it's time to think about, and this sort of gets at some of the discussion we just had, how to increase available funding sources from local, state, federal, private, other sources to combat and manage these aquatic invasives. So this slide, provides some of the 2021 information about our aquatic nuisance control grant and aid program that we talked about a little bit. But in a nutshell, we awarded grants to 42 municipalities and 6 other entities in 2021. The total ask from all the different grant proposals we received was 1.8 million. Against that, we were able to award 450,000, which has been constant for the last couple of years. Some of that comes from motorboat registration revenue, some comes from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer Award, and some comes from our one-time motorboat registration fund surplus, which is dwindling and will probably be all gone at the end of this calendar year. We talked a little bit already about the motorboat registration funds, how that breaks down, but we can use 20% for grants. We're authorized to use up to 17% of the total amount of motorboat registration funds for program administration, paying for full-time equivalent staff members. So DEC only gets 37% of the motorboat registration funds. Some go to Agency of Transport, some go to Fish and Wildlife, some might go to Agency of Ag. And to Jack's question, can we tweak those numbers? I agree with Kim. This is set in statute. I think Kim shared the statute in her presentation. So it's up to the legislature to change those funding allocations from motorboat registration fees. Also, looking at the fees, that's something that DMV handles. How much do they charge for registering motorboats? Those fees haven't gone up in a while. Governor Scott has made it clear that increasing fees is not really his top priority. He's more about making Vermont affordable for Vermonters. So we haven't seen any fee increases, but that's something that should be considered with inflation and whatnot, increasing pressure and demand. That is not a legislative issue. That's more of an internal DMV, Agency of Transportation discussion in relation to how they set fees. They do have to submit fee bills to the legislature, so it does require some legislative action, but that's an easier path to consider, in my opinion, than actually tweaking those funding percentages. Kim talked about how it's not a competitive grant fund, and we're only funding, up to 75%, but in a lot of cases, only 25% of the applications that come in. There's some challenges around that, and I think we're going to look at for 2022 the pros and cons of implementing a competitive grant fund. Try that out. Not trying to reduce from 48 grant awards to a much smaller number, but maybe introducing some limited minimum bars that applicants must meet to receive grant and aid funding, such as a complete application, good alignment with one of our stated funding priorities, and just see how that goes. But right now, it's a limited amount of fund. We're spreading it around very thin, and I think that creates some incentive for some applicants to ask for more money than they really need, and then they don't spend all the money that they said they were going to spend, which makes accounting and funding allocation challenging. So we're going to look at that issue, and we'll see how that factors into the upcoming 2022 request for proposals. What is a nice story is the last point here, that we do leverage significant funding from towns, municipalities, lake associations through our limited award amount. So you saw these two slides from Kim already. More participants in the grant and aid program. That's both good and bad. It's great that more Vermont associations and organizations are focused on preventing the spread of AIS, but this also means that the spread is real and there's more water bodies affected. And then you can see on the right the big delta between the blue line, which is how much funding we have available, and the red line, which is how much funding we're being asked for in the grant proposal. So there's clearly, over on the right side, there's clearly a gap here, which is the real gap that municipalities, lake associations deal with when they say, well, we need this much money, but on aggregate, we need this much money. So how do we come up with a balance to combat aquatic invasive species in our water bodies? And then here you can see, it's kind of the final figures that from the last couple of years of how much we've awarded, how much we've leveraged, and what the total is. And, there's a couple of figures down here for 2021 that we're still processing, so we'll have those numbers. So, a couple more slides.
Yeah, Oliver, we're running tight, so if you can take another couple minutes, wrap it up.
We'll do. This is an important slide for folks to see that this will be our last year with current funding that we can award grants at the level of $450,000. That's because in 2023 we will no longer have that one-time surplus of motorboat registration funds, so we will be down to $350K starting in 2023. And that's in the face of increasing demand and increasing challenges out there. So that's a problem that we should discuss and think about how to address. We did try to reduce the funding, the grant funds back in 2020, because we saw this surplus dwindling too quickly, and we wanted to spread that out more. But at that point, we had already told the legislature what we were planning to do, and so we had to stick with it. And we were asked to try to maintain those higher funding levels through as long as we could. So sort of short-term benefit, medium to long-term pain. So that's the situation that we're currently in. Just a couple more slides and I'll wrap up. So what I'll talk about here, some of the solutions. Let's focus on this side. I think what we're trying to work out in DC is additional staff, trying to make our programs clearer through manuals, operational manuals, and training opportunities, clarifying roles. better digital tools, and better use of survey data, geospatial maps to prioritize our efforts. But those are more technical solutions. I think funding wise, in getting into some of the discussion, what I think this is my last slide, where I think we need to focus our efforts on funding wise is, it's great that Representative Dolan introduced a sticker bill to increase revenue, or a decal bill to increase revenue for AIS work. We'll see if that draft legislation has legs. We can match what's happening elsewhere in New England, specifically New Hampshire and Maine. But that's not going to be a lot of money. It's how many non-resident boaters bring their boats in to Vermont, multiply that by a sticker of between $30 to $50 per person. You're not, it's probably $50,000 or less on an annual basis. So not a huge new funding source. As Jack mentioned, legislative advocacy to identify new sources of funds or prioritize this work against other things might be something that we're sort of overdue for right now. And I think the ARPA opportunity, my last point, is pretty limited. There is some opportunities for municipalities to use ARPA funds for capital costs associated with aquatic invasive species efforts. So that could be things like decontamination units. So there's a small opportunity there that we're looking at pursuing. We could maybe get like Champlain Basin grant program funds as a match for the non-state cost, and help communities who are having to borrow funds from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund for this. So there's a bit of complexity to work out there, but all that to say, there might be a little bit of ARPA money for capital costs, but not a sort of slam dunk new source of funds. So I'll leave it at that. Sorry to run over. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Oliver, thank you very much. Now we'll open it up to questions. Chris, we have anything in the chat box?
Yes, we do. Dave Johnson brought up a question. Can you say more about the process for advocating for increasing Mbra fees?
I can't say a lot about that. I'd have to talk to the DMV and ask them a little bit about their process for changing or increasing those registration fees. You go on the DMV website, you download the paperwork, and there's you pay a certain fee based on the size of your boat, if memory serves. And those fees are updated periodically. I'd have to check and see when was that done most recently. Are they thinking about increasing fees? Do they follow a process similar to DEC does, where if we want to increase fees, we have to work through our political leadership on what's called a fee bill, and then if our political leadership agrees, then that goes to the legislature for consideration from the government. So it's that process, I believe, to increase the fees that the DMV charges for motorboat registration. And we haven't explored that yet, to the best of my knowledge. So that's something we can explore with the DMV. They may already have some plans to increase fees given what's happening with inflation these days. So we could see, I would hope that if they were increasing fees, across the board for automotive registration, that they would sort of be automatic to increase fees for other types of vehicle registration, including motorboats. But we'd have to look into that to learn more about it.
Okay, we had Bob Donis was asking, why are the funds from ARPA just limited to just use for equipment?
So there's the United States Treasury had an interim final rule saying that ARPA funds can be used for related to clean water state revolving fund priorities, which there are 11. So then you got to go to that document, and in that document it says clean water state revolving funds can be used for capital costs associated with aquatic invasive species. So basically ARPA is saying, you can use ARPA money for things that are already prioritized under their states, different states, clean water state revolving funds, and those existing priorities. And that's where the limitation is for capital costs associated with aquatic invasive species. So we're kind of boxed into that corner, and we're exploring, are there any needs there that could be eligible for use of the ARPA funds? How that will work, is it ARPA funds topping up the Clean Water State Revolving Fund? Is it some other pathway for municipalities to access those ARPA funds? is something that we're still working out, but we could, in the Clean Water State Revolving Fund annual use plan, for the upcoming state fiscal year, put in a sort of sub-program to say, okay, we're sort of ring fencing some Clean Water State Revolving Funds that have ARPA source or ARPA heritage for capital costs associated with aquatic invasive species prevention. Send us your applications. And then we're in very, very early stages of some discussions about then being creative, helping municipalities, deal with match funding requirements through some of the Lake Champlain Basin Program grant funding. We'll see if that materializes or not. But really, to answer the question, it comes out of what's the language in the U.S. Treasury interim rule and the existing established priorities for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund.
Okay, and then we had, thank you, Oliver. We had one for Beth Torpy. Would the ARPA funds only be available through DEC, or is it something the towns can only access?
I know that towns can access it. So towns have the pathway, they can use their ARPA funds for this should they choose to. And we're also, so that's an option. Whether or not any towns actually decide to prioritize this against many other priorities they have is an open question, but in DEC is looking at how we can use the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and some of the ARPA funds we're getting to try to make this happen as well.
All right, and then we have from Bruce Durgan, wanted to know, would it make sense for Fablab to support the implementation of the AIS fee as a increase to the Mbra fees rather than a separate sticker process? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to read Bruce's question. I'm going to make sure I understand. Would it make sense for Fablab to support the implementation of the AIS fee as an increase in Mbra fees rather than a separate sticker price? I guess I'm not exactly sure what's meant by the AIS fee. I think what he means is, could we increase funds for AIS by increasing Mbra fees, motor registration fees, rather than a separate sticker process with that extra fee going direct to DEC? I mean, Fablab could try, I think it's an easier process to increase the fees to then say any extra money has to go to DEC. That then requires amending the piece of statute that breaks down who gets what, which I think is harder. While we and DEC think we have a great claim and should be getting more of the Mbra funds, others may think they have a better claim, and we get into a bit of a who just fighting over limited funds. So I think, as I said, I think it's perhaps somewhat easier to increase the fees because that's happening elsewhere in the state that I know of. Is a normal action every certain number of years, and with inflation should be being discussed. I think that's easier than tweaking who gets what percentage of the overall Mbra between DEC, Fish and Wildlife, Agency of Transportation, and Agency of Agriculture. But Fablab may see that differently, and they should pursue whatever process they think makes the most sense. Beth had a question: has non-motorized watercraft registration been considered? Yeah, it's been considered. It's always a sort of frowned on. Should we be putting out a program for kayaks, canoes, sailboats, etc.? But I think if the decal bill ever gets hearings in front of the legislature, I think we should ask that question to say, hey, in addition to non-resident motorized boaters, should we consider a non-motorized watercraft registration? But I think that's been discussed, considered, and sort of shot down in the past. Chrissy Kano might know more about that.
All right, Chris, I don't know if there's any other questions, but we probably have time for one more.
Well, there was one from Natalie Fisher. Can ARPA funds be used for a dash boat? Sure what that is.
Yeah, I mean, ARPA funds can be used for capital costs. So I guess if someone was purchasing a boat to do dash and was a purchase of equipment, that's considered a capital cost. So yes, but paying for a service, in other words, hiring a contractor to do dash, is not a capital cost. So if your question is, can we capital ARPA funds, I would put it this way: any capital cost, including purchasing equipment such as a boat, is eligible for Clean Water State Revolving Fund funding, which has a direct linkage with ARPA funds. So yes, ARPA funds can be used to buy a dash boat.
Okay, with that, if there's any other questions, we'll have to address them at the end of the program because we're running a couple minutes late. So Oliver, thank you. And hopefully you'll be available at the end of the program if anybody has any questions.
Great, thank you.
We're going to be moving on. Meg Modley, who's the LCBP Aquatic Invasive Species Management Coordinator, is going to give us an update on the Lake Champlain Basin Program AIS funding. So Meg?
Thanks. Can you see my presentation in presentation mode?
Not yet.
I have shared my screen. Nothing?
No, we can see you.
Okay, let's exit it and try it again. Share screen, screen 2, share.
There we go.
Now?
Yep, you're good.
Excellent, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Again, my name's Meg Modley. I work with the Lake Champlain Basin Program and New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission. I've been focused on invasive species management, working with the Basin Program for about 18 years. Many of you, if you're in the Lake Champlain watershed, have received some grant funds, hopefully, from my organization. We have a specific grant category focused on aquatic invasive species spread prevention and management that I'll talk to you about today. But just as a reminder, we are operating with our state, federal, and local and provincial partners in New York, Vermont, and Quebec across the watershed on invasive species early detection, rapid response, control, management, research, et cetera. So we do have an approved aquatic nuisance species management plan. Most of the funding that we receive through that program goes to assist the water chestnut harvesting program and other outreach targeted projects throughout the entirety of the watershed. And we sit on the National Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. We collaborate with regional and international groups, and we help to support the Boat Launch Steward program on Lake Champlain and have been doing so since 2007. It's really exciting off the bat that Vermont DEC has launched their WISPA, or their Watercraft Inspection Stewardship Data Collection application, so that all of that data is now in one location, and over a few years of time will really serve as a good guide for how to prioritize where to place stewardship and decontamination across the state to help prevent the regional spread of aquatic invasive species. Our programs are primarily focused on harvesting and control. Because we are federally funded, we get most of our resources from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with some other grant programs through the Army Corps of Engineers. Our programs typically require quality assurance project plans. We'll talk about those in brief. But here we are mostly supporting programs to inspect and decontaminate boats around Lake Champlain and other water bodies in the Lake Champlain Basin. So in terms of grants and what kind of money is available, we have what we call local implementation grants. They are divided into categories with different topics that cover our 4 priorities in our long-term management plan for Lake Champlain, which is called Opportunities for Action. We focus on clean water, number 1, healthy ecosystems, number 2, thriving communities, number 3, and an informed and involved public, number 4. So for the local implementation grants, which are available to local municipalities and 501c3s, and academic institutions. The healthy ecosystems grant categories are the ones that we look at specifically for native habitat and species protection, as well as invasive species spread prevention and management. So if you look at the bottom of the chart here, we release these grants annually, and they usually are made available in August. And we are working on, we've sent out awards for our small and large implementation clean water grants, as well as our planning grants, and we are reviewing our healthy ecosystems, native habitat and species, as well as our invasive species spread prevention grants right now. Our executive committee will decide on those on January 20th, and we'll send out award letters and decline letters after that point. Typically, we have about $200,000 to give out in the invasive species spread prevention and management grants in the Lake Champlain watershed. So it's not just Vermont, it includes New York as well. So these grants are currently at a cap of $15,000 each. We're looking at increasing that amount in for the next federal fiscal year, which would make those dollars available for the 2023 field season. We have seen an increase in our federal funding for the program. Many thanks primarily to Senator Leahy, Sanders, Congressman Welch, and the equivalents in New York. So we have in the past required match, but because we work with our state partners to get that match in place, we do not require any longer for there to be match for these grant dollars. However, if your project leverages other dollars and can demonstrate non-federal match, that often makes the projects more competitive. And the hitch here is that we do often require quality assurance project plans. So if you're looking to do, and we encourage long-term management plans, surveying, evaluation of any kind of management, even boat launch stewardship where you're collecting data, we have a generic boat launch steward quality assurance project plan that we ask folks to sign on to. And this ensures that we're asking consistent questions, recording them in consistent ways so that we have comparable data over what's now proving to be close to decades of data to show behavior change over time, to show where threats are coming from, what invasive species we're intercepting, how the public is behaving in terms of are they taking spread prevention measures. So it's pretty important information that we require there. So successful applicants. We really encourage folks to contact the Basin program if you're considering an application to our organization. We want to make sure that your project is eligible, that it's in the right grant category, so that we can help not advise on content, but on making sure that you're a right fit for the program. Oftentimes projects will come in and they just miss the mark because they don't understand the intent of the grant category very well. These are projects that cannot be focused just on private property. I think there's been some challenges and frustrations in the past about like shore owner property desires to conduct mechanical harvesting of a general weed category to clear up their waterfront. And these dollars being federal really need to be focused on public use, on making sure that it's improving and managing specifically invasive species and spread prevention, and just not all things that we consider to be a nuisance. So our applications that are successful include a really clear statement of need with very clear deliverables, so measurable results. Oftentimes there's a long-term management plan that this project is being considered as a part of. Many folks are doing their individual lake or watershed management plans that include an AIS component to it. Hopefully it can includes education and outreach and spread prevention, as well as targeted management of your target invasive species to help prevent that spread as well. We encourage routine evaluation and management that often takes the form of a survey, some type of an evaluation, and it has an outreach component. So meaning if you're doing active management, you're also communicating this with your lake management program, with your society, with your listserv, with your social media, and that you have a pretty clear and detailed budget so we understand how the dollars are going to be spent. Current projects that we're funding include a lot of invasive species surveys, control, primarily diver-assisted suction harvesting. There are some riparian species that we're also supporting the management of. So in addition to Eurasian water milfoil and variable leaf milfoil, a lot of water chestnut, Japanese knotweed, flowering rush projects as well. And then the biggest grant category awards go to boat launch stewardship. So whether those are greeter programs or steward programs in New York, lake associations apply to us and we support their steward program as long as they follow our quality assurance project plan. These photographs are just of some of the hookah diver assisted suction harvesting in the upper right, and in the lower right, we have an approved quality assurance project plan out on a boat for the Upper Saranac Lake Association, who's doing a survey and management there. So we have a lot of other programs that we're engaged and involved with, not just stewardship. We're really looking at the major pathways by which invasive species come and leave the Lake Champlain watershed and this entire region. So we have a major initiative looking at preventing the spread of invasive species through the Champlain Canal in New York, because that is the primary point by which invasive species have been entering Lake Champlain. We have 51 known non-native and invasive species in Lake Champlain. And when we summarize our data that shows where trailered watercraft were last, meaning which water body they came from last, they're coming from lakes and going to lakes that have quite a number of known non-native and invasive species. And so we're really sensitive to the fact that regionally, we are the source lake for our inland waterways in New York and Vermont. And that's why it's really important for us to armor Lake Champlain in particular with stewardship and decontamination stations. We're involved and engaged in a lot of outreach. We've worked with the Community Sailing Center and a local artist to develop this beautiful sail that'll be sailed on the Burlington waterfront for the next 2 to 3 years, as long as the sail will last, depicting some of the invasives that we want to prevent from hitchhiking on boats and trailers. And all of this, of course, can't be done without you. You guys are the boots on the ground. You are the harness, basically, to channel these dollars into to execute these needed spread prevention programs. We know we're not going to prevent everything from moving. If we can slow it down and prevent certain introductions, that's fantastic. But we do work on an early detection and rapid response team, and we are poised and ready to respond to new invasive species if it comes to the region. So we're now currently pouring dollars into looking at the Round Goby expansion, which could threaten the Champlain Canal and Lake Champlain. So that's all I have for right now, but if there are any other topics that you would like a presentation on in the future, more than happy to talk about any other thing that strikes your fancy.
Meg, you did good. You were the closest to getting done in 10 minutes. So now we'll open it up for questions. Chris, if you want to go to the chat box.
Yeah, we have one from Beth. Beth wanted to know, basically asking everybody else is asking, what portion of the funding that's available through the Lake Champlain Basin program can be used outside of the basin? And she's specifically talking about Lake Nymphamagog, but
it can't. None of our dollars can be spent outside of the Lake Champlain watershed. So we have some initiatives for early detection and rapid response where we can use typically Great Lakes Fishery Commission dollars to address threats before they come here. But in terms of on the ground program management or greeter projects, they have to be within the delineation of the watershed to fund. I thought she was going to ask a question about the mussel dogs, because we have a love for these brilliant sniffing canines that we hope to someday be able to afford and train in the Lake Champlain watershed that sniff out dry-seeded mussels such as zebra and quagga mussels, as well as other critters that we don't want.
thank you. I guess Christine Cano has another one about how many boat wash stations does the Lake Champlain Basin program currently manage?
Good question. So we are constantly working in partnership with DEC and with Fish and Wildlife. We are supporting the purchase of a decon station in Quebec. They're part of our program. We have 3 on the Vermont side of Lake Champlain. There are 7 on the New York side. We have some catch up and work to do in terms of the acceptability of decon stations at Vermont Fish and Wildlife Access sites. Every year we're trying to gain acceptance and permission to establish another decon site at a location where we know we get a lot of traffic and we see a lot of invasives, primarily leaving the lake headed to uninvaded water bodies. But we have intercepted some scary things, quagga mussels and hydrilla in particular, coming to Lake Champlain from the Great Lakes or from the Connecticut River. So we will continue to push forward with trying to armor the Vermont side of Lake Champlain with more decontamination stations.
Thank you for that. I have another question. This is more, if you're coming from the standpoint of a lake that isn't infected and is outside of the Lake Champlain Basin, you mentioned something about a rapid response program. And so that's something that I'm very interested in trying to develop. In other words, if you're not infected and all of a sudden somebody detects an invasive species in the lake, how do you act quickly and what are the resources available to you to squash it? Do you have things in that area that would be of benefit?
Yeah, I have definitely a couched presentation to give to you, but do know that your state staff, however limited they are, and you do need more of them, absolutely. So Kim and Oliver are both very engaged and aware of our Rapid Response Task Force, and Kim is an active member of that task force, as is Sean Good from Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, and they know and are ready and have the tools to be able to respond, meaning they know how to show up, confirm species identification, delineate the population, conduct a risk assessment to evaluate how invasive this particular organism may be dependent on the water quality and the location in which it's found, and then take an evaluation of what types of management options might be able to be employed to respond, to contain, or possibly even eradicate the population if it's small enough. So those are tools that are developed that the state is aware of and can respond to, even if it's outside of our watershed. It's just that the resources that the Lake Champlain Basin program can bring to the table, we do have a rapid response fund set aside so that we have dollars poised and ready to go to be able to respond to the next invader, because we know it's too late once we already find out to go looking for money. I don't think that that's a benefit that the state has with the limited funding, but they do have the ability to respond and pivot if a new invader were to come into the state outside of the basin.
Right. I was more thinking in terms of what could a local lake community do to prepare themselves in the eventuality that this happened while they waited for the state. And I'm not trying to be derogatory about this, but there is reality there. While they waited for people to find the time to come up and look at something. I mean, within a closed season, is there some kind of a local plan that could be developed to try to deal with this?
Sure. I mean, I think primarily what you're going to want to look at is some New York communities have had really great success in convincing municipalities and towns to set aside part of their budget for invasive species management. And the way that you're going to be able to respond to something new is if you have trained VIP patrollers who know what they're looking for. They're going to be your early detection. And if you're too far along the invasion curve, when you find it, you're not going to really be able to respond other than trying to contain it or manage the most heavily infested areas by like a boat launch or a public beach area. So thinking about how to get organized in terms of knowing who your state contacts are, because if you're going to take any management actions, you're going to need their help and their permitting advice, and probably just be ready in terms of being trained to do the early detection and to report what you find. Those are some of the early steps that I think local communities can take in terms of preparedness.
Thank you.
All right, we have 2 people that raised their hand. Well, Jack raised his hand first and then Kim. So Jack, why don't you ask your question?
Okay, Meg, thanks for a terrific presentation that was very lucid. One of my questions is, since much of Vermont is not in the Lake Champlain Basin, we're not eligible for those funds, which is a problem. So I'm wondering if you and Kim perhaps get together, since some are eligible and some aren't, to even things out in Vermont so that those that are in the basin don't have, twice the opportunity that the rest of us have who are handicapped.
Kim and I are in constant communication. I think, I'll let her respond. Basically, the way that the state's grant programs are set up, they do not give favor, I think, to those that are in or outside of the Lake Champlain Basin. And that is an unfortunate piece or a positive piece, the way you look at it, that really the Lake Champlain Basin program was formed and that there were more resources brought specifically to the watershed. Understand we have to share that with Quebec and New York as well. So it's a plus and it's a minus. And I'll let Kim answer if there's, in terms of, weighting projects, but, equally there are other funding sources for like the Connecticut River area that aren't applicable to the Lake Champlain region, but I understand your question.
Hi, Kim.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a couple of things regarding the funding. I don't think the basin has more funds available. I think this is just another avenue for basin programs, potential basin programs to provide or to receive funds from Lake Champlain. So we know about those projects that are proposed, and it doesn't really affect the way that we fund projects in the state. So I think it's a bonus, but I don't think it's a negative effect on the rest of the state. So then my second comment was about the early detection rapid response plan. So if there is a new introduction of a plant or animal, it is mentioned at the greeter training and at the VIP trainings that if you find something that you think has been introduced, that you call me immediately, and we get on it within a day. So this year we had 12 early detection rapid response events, a dozen, and that I responded to it. And basically my team and we stopped everything else that we're doing and we're on site the next day. So there's not a lag time, just to let you know. But I do need to be informed that that is happening.
I'll quickly try and answer this last question, but it's complicated. Oh, and then came another one. So in terms of legal authority for mandatory inspection, so it depends on how you interpret rules, regulations, and laws. The only water body in the Lake Champlain watershed that has a mandatory inspection and decontamination program is Lake George. They are in a unique situation where the Lake George Park Commission has the authority to regulate every single point of access to that particular water body, and therefore can mandate that every watercraft has to be inspected or decontaminated if need be before it launches. For the rest of New York State and for Vermont, there have been revisions consistently every, I'd say about 4 or 5 years on the AIS transport laws and what is required for inspection and decontamination. And I think it just would take too much time to go over it right now, but we could have a specific presentation on the differences between the regulations in Vermont, New York, and Quebec at a future time if you're so interested.
Hey, Chris, we're tight on time. I don't know if there's one more question.
Yeah, Christine had one last question. Does the Richelieu River, Quebec have any regulations for AIS transportation for boat traffic coming into Vermont?
They're not very strong. There are some regulations, but they're more specific to, like, they have very stringent bait fish regulations. So they can only purchase bait fish from a green list. There's not a blacklist, like we kind of follow that approach of you can't use this. So there are differences depending on what you're talking about, but there is not there's not a very strict regulation on AIS transport in Quebec at this time. They are considering it, but it's, the Richelieu River is the exit of Lake Champlain into the St. Lawrence Seaway, and then the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay, Meg, I have one quick question. Is there a separate application required for the Lake Champlain Basin, or would that go through the same process we normally go through?
If the normal process you're referring to is the grant and aid program for
Yes.
the state, yes, absolutely. We have our own application process and grant review process. So you need to go to our website, which is www.lcbp.org, and under grants and opportunities. So for the funding for this field season upcoming, we've already received the applications. We're reviewing them, and we'll make awards late January, early February. So if you're for this audience, if this is new to you, you'd be considering grant applications that you would look for in August that would be available for the field season of 2023.
Okay. That's good information to have. We appreciate everything you just presented. We're going to take a break here. We had originally scheduled for 15 minutes. Let's make it 10 minutes. I have about 10:35. So why don't we say 10:45, we'll resume. I think the second part of our program is very informative. There's going to be alternate funding opportunities of what some of the other lakes are doing out there and want to share their information. So I encourage everybody to come back. After that, we'll have some more questions and answers. But again, let's resume here at 10:45. So we'll see everybody in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
The mission has since broadened to really all conservation matters related to protecting and restoring natural resources in our districts. So we're a local partner. We collaborate pretty heavily with the federal government and with the state government, and with other organizations, nonprofits, local partners, volunteers to try to carry out that mission. We are classified as municipalities, and we are locally governed. So we have a board of elected supervisors. Each district has 5 supervisors that reside within the district. They're elected to 5-year terms, and any landowner can vote to those elections. And so those 5 supervisors direct me and my staff towards the tasks that we undertake each year. So one of the cool things about the conservation districts is, while we carry out a lot of the things the state wants done, we ultimately answer to the people in our districts. And so landowners are often eager to engage with us because they see us as an alternative to sometimes feeling like, the government's the bad guy. We in Vermont are fully grant funded at this time. Which means although our existence is in Vermont state statute, there's no statutory funding for the conservation districts at this time. So we have to compete for grants that are always targeted at very specific tasks, be that, helping to conduct education and outreach about water quality, talk to farmers about nutrient management planning, or in this instance, help oversee greater programs in our district. And I should just mention right now that so at this moment, all of our funding comes from grants, which means that all of our funding is very directed towards a very specific task. There is an effort underway by the conservation districts to advocate for an increase in our funding and a bit more of consistency in that funding, so that the districts can maintain staff, kind of reduce turnover. A lot of district staff seem to matriculate off to the state or to the feds, and that obviously weakens the conservation district programming. So we're trying to raise our profile and convince folks that we should be funded more regularly. And the reason I mention that right now is that if that were to come to pass in some form, I think our capacity to support the greater programs would grow pretty significantly. We've been having some broad conversations about how could the districts, use this additional money if we're able to get it. And the first thing that comes to my mind is the greater programs and how they're not fully funded at this time. And we don't have enough partners to help pay for them. And we would love to take a much more active role on that side of things. In terms of what we do in Windham County, we're a regional partner. So we work with the town, in this case, the town of Wilmington. We work with the Lake Raponda Association, and with local volunteers to implement and manage greater programs at 2 or 3 water bodies. It's varied from year to year based on available funding. But we've done greater programs at Somerset Reservoir, Harriman Reservoir, and Lake Raponda. They're all really different situations because Harriman and Somerset are on private land. They're part of Great River Hydro's hydroelectric operations. And so it's been very difficult to convince other funders to help pay for those programs because they see it as a private company's obligation. They do provide us some funding, but not enough. In terms of what we do for the greeter programs, the Conservation District handles writing the application for funding each year. We hold the funds, we distribute the funds, we hire the greeters at the 3 water bodies, and that includes doing advertising, attracting candidates, interviewing them, calling references, and then eventually when we hire them, going through the hiring process, tax documents, all that stuff. So, and that's something the district has considerable experience at because we hire other staff for other programs. So I think there's an efficiency there in having us do that. District also holds liability insurance and can cover workers' compensation requirements. We can provide orientation and training to the greeters. We can provide oversight of them as employees, just like we do the rest of our staff. We can also kind of streamline the tracking process. As a result of running 2 or 3 greeter programs each year, it's made it easier to manage the data. It's been really nice this year that the app has been implemented because we used to have to manage all of that data as well, but we still track greeters hours, volunteer hours, and we use Google Docs and Google Sheets for a lot of that, which has made my job much simpler when it's time to write final reports. So I guess I would say there are kind of pros and cons to doing things the way that we've done them. I know that we're not the only conservation district that serves as a regional partner, and I know that it's done differently in different arrangements. But I guess the big pros to the way we do this, I think, are that the district has experience managing employees, tracking financial matters, including employee taxes. And there's also an opportunity to share staff between sites, which has been a huge advantage for us the past couple of years. We typically hire maybe 1 more staff than we would need at bare minimum, and we can shuffle them between 2 or 3 sites. And then if someone needs to be away for vacation, which, as you know, happens all the time in the summer, we're not forced to shut down operations. And then I guess the main con to doing it the way that we do it is that my time has to be paid for. I don't have a different funding source to support the time I spend running the greeter program. So that has to be billed to the greeter program at my billable rate, which costs. And so I guess that does cause some of the funds to be spent on the district and not on greeters. And I think the more that our partners, the town and the Lake Association and volunteers do towards the greeter program, the cheaper my time can be, the less of my time that's required. And that's one of the biggest things I noticed from last year to this year is everything is more efficient and more streamlined because we know what we're doing and we kind of know how to work together. And so it has been easier to stay on budget. Last year, I had a bunch of hours that were over and above what was really allowable in our agreement. So they were counted as match and not funded, which we really try to avoid. And I guess I'll mention, each district is unique. Part of the one of the great things about the Vermont conservation districts is that they serve their local communities. And so they vary wildly from district to district based on what needs that community is identified and believes it should address. And districts, because they're grant funded, are always juggling a bunch of grants and conducting work planning to figure out what's our capacity, what work can we take on in the next year. So before I say that you should reach out to your district to see if they want to partner with you, just be aware that, the answer may not always be the same. And also that they may also need time, even if they do want to figure out how to fit that in their work plan. If you are interested in partnering with your local conservation district, I just put a link in the chat. That's the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts website, and it's a great starting point. If you go there, you can find all the districts, figure out what the geographic area is and who to contact there to talk to them about this opportunity. And I'll also put my email address in the chat box in case folks want to reach out with questions after this. And then I see there's one question in the chat. What fraction of Vermont's conservation districts manage greeter programs? I'm guessing Kim can probably answer that. I know of one other district for sure, but beyond that, I'm not sure.
2 conservation districts manage the projects. Holy Meadowy, NRCD, Hillary Solomon, she helps in a different capacity than Corey does. So Corey is kind of hands-on with the projects, and Hillary is more a grant administrator for us. We have also had Winooski. Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. White River also is as a kind of a grant administrator. And then we have had Winooski River Conservation District participate as a regional partner too.
Great, thanks, Kim.
You're welcome.
So are there other questions out there about, I guess, conservation districts or how we've done things in Windham County?
Jack, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so Corey, I have sort of a follow-up question to that. Maybe some of it involves Kim, but it would seem to me that if a number of the greeter program grants are going through you, that's less work for Kim and her staff, but maybe not in terms of reviewing fewer number of grants. And when Josh was here, he was encouraging us to try to do these together, just as you described here. So any comments on that, or where are we on that? Maybe Kim wants to chime in on that or not.
So districts are poised to be partners. Some districts have differing capabilities and capacities for this type of work, and also for writing grants and administrating grants. So we have looked for different partners throughout New York State or Vermont to help us. But I think only a few are really able to help because they're knowledgeable and informed about AIS concerns and issues.
Okay, Meg, you have your hand up?
Thanks. I just wanted to put this, this is another idea when we think about, there are different state models across the region of how stewardship or greeter programs can be coordinated to manage for efficiency, and ignore the numbers, but just understand the concept maybe that, in the state of Maine, for example, they have a lake association group that actually has taken on recruiting, training, and it's like a state lake association takes on hiring, training, and managing stewards for the state. And in New York, the state of New York has a huge grant available that they gave to the Adirondack Watershed Institute at Paul Smith College, and they manage over 145 stewards that they bring on, and it's all consistent training and data collection and management. And the lake associations basically purchase a steward from that institution for their lake association. So there are a number of different models out there that I think, could be moved towards to both make things more consolidated and efficient. If you set sort of a goal for the next 4 or 5 years to think about, but this idea of having conservation districts manage and hire and bring on stewards, I think would be a huge asset to consistency, to being able to manage and both the data and the stewards in the field, and take that huge responsibility off of what often is the lake association president, who has to end up going down to the launch and checking on the stewards and make sure they're collecting the data.
That's a good point, Meg. And I guess I also want to mention, one possible advantage from the conservation district's perspective on working with these programs is we get to know the people that live around the lake and take an interest in the lake, and a lot of other work that needs to be done can be identified. And ultimately that can lead to other funding pools, not to do greeter work, but to support the district. So
it's 11 o'clock.
Other questions?
So I might just chime in here. So I'm I guess the main beneficiary of having someone like Corey. And I would just like to, from the person that's been one of the supervisors and done some writing of these grants myself, just say how much better it's been, easier for me to have someone with Corey's background, his knowledge, to help with the writing of the grants, to managing, as he was describing, and for getting the reports in. And this really goes to what Meg was saying just a minute ago as well. There's a great benefit of doing this, and I think that Corey provides, terrific service. My great disappointment is that the conservation districts aren't supported better than they are, and they're not allowed to have a more fair percentage of what the greeter funding is. But if that were to be possible, I think that those that are on this call that are involved with grant writing, management, and reporting, I think your lives would be better. I think we would have better programs, and I think we would deliver things much more efficiently. And then to chime in on the last point Corey was making is, when you get to know these people in the conservation district, there are other things about your lake that you'd like to know about or you'd like to have help with. And then what you have is you have a contact, someone that you can go to. Corey hears about grants. He hears about availability, at least in our district, about plants that you can buy inexpensively to do some of the riparian work around lakes and streams that are quite important. So it helps with their mission. It helps with what we're doing. And from my perspective, I couldn't manage what I do without someone like Corey to partner with and bounce ideas off. It's been really a terrific asset, and I hope that some of you on this call maybe will explore with your conservation districts whether similar things might be available, and support the sort of work that Corey and the other district administrators are doing, and try to get recognized and get funding, which they is only going to help our state and help the objectives of what we're dealing about with lakes and ponds.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay, Chris, are there any other questions? Because I think we have time for about one more.
There's no more questions in the chat box.
Okay. Then Corey, thank you very much. Want to stick around? Maybe somebody will have a question at the end of the program. We're going to have a hard stop at 12 o'clock, so we're keep moving here. The next part of our program is basically a roundtable discussion, and we're going to have 4 presenters. On the first one, then Jack's going to come on, and then we have Chris Van Alt and Dave Johnson. So since I'm first, I'll go right into it. I'm president of Lake Association in Elmore here for Lake Elmore. And what we've done over the past couple of years, to supplement the state funding that we receive, I've kind of put this list together. And this has helped, although it takes a lot of effort and a lot of volunteers to make these things happen. We have been able to raise funding that has supported the program for both milfoil and our greeter program. So I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly. First thing we have is a general dues for people in the Lake Association. Our Lake Association, all the dollars that are raised go 100% back into the lake. We don't have any tennis courts. We don't have any basketball courts. Everything goes back to the lake. And we charge a minimal amount. We have a $25 association fee. And what we found in the past couple of years, we've been able to work with the town of Elmore. And when they send out their tax bills, we actually put in a flyer reminding people about their dues. And we also have a line on there that says, if you want to contribute a little bit more than the $25, we're more than willing to accept that. And that has been really a good fundraiser for the association and for the projects we have going on. That way it reaches everybody that's paying taxes in the town. including people as far away as Greece, that people that own property in Elmore and have contributed. So that's been great. The other thing that I would suggest is that everybody approach their select board, and every year during town meeting, you'll notice that there's a town appropriations, which are charities that the town approves and funds every year. And we apply and send in our application for appropriations, and then it goes to town meeting, and the town has been very generous in approving those. So I would suggest that you talk to your select board and make sure that if you are an approved 501c3, that the town will help fund your program. And we have found that the town is more than willing to help out, as well as all the people in the town who feel that the lake is very important. The other items that I have listed here are things that we do in the summertime, although COVID has kind of really impacted us the past couple of years. But we try to hold like 4 pancake breakfasts. We do a family bingo once a week during the summer. You know, it's not a big money game. We give out prizes and baked goods, and we only charge a couple dollars to come in, but it's a great fundraiser and really becomes a town event that people just love. We also we try to do a craft fair once a year where we charge, you know, the crafters to have a table. It's pretty simple. We do an ice cream social once a year. That's a big hit. We do that usually in August. You know, we get the ice cream sometimes donated from Ben & Jerry's or some other suppliers. We just get volunteers to scoop it out, and it's all by donation, but you know, it helps. Every bit helps. The other thing we do from time to time is sell 50/50 tickets. We do those at some selected events. You know, and Labor Day is a big time here in Elmore. We have fireworks, we have a block party, and we try to sell 50/50 tickets. Doesn't cost the association anything except for a roll of tickets. Some lucky winner gets some cash, and the Lake Association always wins. We get 50%. The other thing we do, we haven't done it in the past couple of years, but we have a quilt raffle. And that could be anything. It could be a donated quilt, it could be a kayak, and you sell tickets for it all summer long. And if the quilt or whatever it is donated, again, it's all profit that goes back into the Lake Association and used for our programs. The last thing I have on here are corporate sponsors. You know, some lakes have marinas, we don't, but we have a fly fishing shop that, especially in winter, does a lot of ice fishing out here. And, you know, maybe you contact some of the corporate companies that are working your lake or involved in your lake and see if they want to make any contributions, because they are making their living off of the lake also. So there are a couple of things that we do here at Elmore. It's been very successful. Again, it takes a lot of volunteers to do this. So that's the downside. We're pretty lucky here that we do get people to volunteer. Unfortunately, they're mainly the same people over and over again. But, you know, we're trying to get some younger people involved that could take this over and keep it going for time to come. So I think all the questions on this are going to be answered at the end of this roundtable. So I'm going to move on right now to Jack, and he can take over and make his presentation.
Thanks, Glenn. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to continue with this theme about how in this roundtable we, in some of our lake associations, have been able to secure the funding. And as you've heard from Oliver, maybe not this year, but next year we may be having a decrease of $200,000 in funding for these programs. So the things that Glenn mentioned and perhaps some of the things that I've mentioned will be helpful. The Two programs that I supervise have been at Somerset and Harriman. These are reservoirs. These are impounded lakes. That is, they're on the Deerfield River. They're dammed up. And as Corey mentioned, the property surrounding them is owned by Great River Hydro. These are the Deerfields in South Central Vermont, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it. But these are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful water bodies. Somerset is in the Green Mountain Forest, and it's an idyllic, wonderful, beautiful setting. Neither one of these reservoirs currently has AIS that we know about, and we'd like to keep it that way. One of the ways that we do that is through our education with our greeter programs. And to give you an idea, at least at Harriman, Harriman is the largest water body that's self-contained within the state of Vermont. It's 2,000 acres. And we're only at one of the 5 or 6 boat launch areas. We're at the largest one, and we just do weekends. And in the last summer that we did this, which was 2 summers ago, we were seeing close to 1,000 boats just on the weekends. So if you added the weekdays, that's several thousand boats just at one of the entry points. So this is a tremendous opportunity to intercept invasive species and also to do education. How do I go? Okay, next slide. Okay, but there is the money problem. And as I mentioned, in 2023, things may get worse if funding goes the way Oliver had mentioned this to you. One of the things that is special about my situation, having these reservoirs that I supervise as opposed to lakes, is we don't have any lake associations. Great River Hydro does not consider itself a lake association. And as a result, we have very few volunteers. In fact, I am the one and only volunteer, which when you apply for Vermont DEC and you only have one volunteer, and I'm a busy guy, I tell you, with lots of things to do, just as many of you are, it's hard to make up that in-kind requirement by the state when you're dealing with reservoirs that are owned privately, essentially, by these groups. Despite Corey Ross's and my best efforts to convince Great River Hydro that they should be putting more money in, as they're required to do at least somewhat through their FERC agreement to support conservation and recreation, we have been unsuccessful. And this has been a major problem. It's also been a problem because the towns that we're in view this as a responsibility of Great River Hydro, and so they're reluctant to put money in. So these wonderful lakes without AIS, with great educational opportunities, there's a problem in terms of how we can fund this. And in fact, this last year for Harriman, even though we had staffed it the previous 2 years, we didn't think there was enough money to staff both because we did not have outsourced funding other than the reader program than the Great Hydro. So what we've done and what might apply in your place, and Glenn alluded to some of these things, is you need to think creatively about how to identify local funding. Because I think if we continue, it's just only going to get more and more difficult. So these list the ones that we've been thinking of, the municipality where your water body is located. Glenn stressed the importance of approaching your select board. What Glenn didn't tell you is that he is on the select board. So he has somewhat of an advantage. I'm not on the select board here, but you need to communicate and explain to your select board why this is important. And it's important that they contribute because some of the people or some of the groups listed below want the town to have some skin in the game before they're going to support you. The other groups include landowners, and I've alluded to Great River Hydro, which is the one that we're dealing with. And we will continue and persist in trying to work with them to have them understand what the situation is and hopefully get them to help out. Local foundations, in our case, there's one called the Wyndham Foundation that I just learned about recently, and we will be seeking some funding through them, but there may be local funding organizations that you should look into. Glenn alluded to this, businesses that are located on the water, whether there's a marina, maybe there's restaurants, a fly fishing shop, you know, these groups may be interested, but these are groups that also want to have the town have some skin in the game, or at least in my area. So that makes the municipal help quite important. And then there's other clubs and organizations and groups that operate on or near the water body. These would include things in our area. There's a sailing club on Lake Harriman. We're trying to interest them. They might be able to even provide help with volunteers. We'll be looking into that. The Vermont Land Trust. And there's a private club in town, the Hermitage Club. It's a group that took over Haystack ski and golf area. It's a private club. And when they're there for the summer, they have their boats in Lake Harriman. They would like to see the town donating before they want to put anything in. So these are important considerations. And then some of the governmental organizations that may be near or with interest in your water bodies, such as the Forest Service, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and then there's another group in Massachusetts for us, the Franklin County Conservation. Generally, these don't have money specifically, but they may know of funding, and these are things to consider. So these are just some ideas to help you think about additional funding should it be needed, and it may be coming down the road. And I'll end there and pass this on to the next speaker and back to Glenn here.
Okay, our next speaker is Chris Van Holt. And Chris, you're up.
Okay, here we go. Does that look all right to you? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding opportunities from the perspective of the lithotrophic lakes. There's a whole series of lakes right now that Oliver and company have identified that are really ready to be reclassified to A1 lakes, and they're not infected. And so with 8 invasive species at this point, their primary concern is to try to stay that way. And so I'll just sort of address the issue from that perspective, given what we're doing here on Maidstone Lake. So I kind of, this is my position on thinking about things. This isn't supposed to be anything from DEC. This is just how I look at it based on running programs here at Maidstone and interacting with DEC and the various programs that are there, the greeter programs and the patroller programs and lay monitoring and things of that nature. So I think that the trophic state of the lake really impacts the management strategy and the funding requirements. It's quite different if you are in a situation where you have a lot of plants around the perimeter of your lake, or the nutrient content of your lake is high, if it's a lot more hospitable to invasive species than it is if you're living in a lake where you have low nutrients. We have the ability with few people to go around and look at the lake and document what's there. But so that changes the way you look at things. So for these lakes, there's typically very clear water. The secchi depths are somewhat greater than 8 meters typically. We have low nutrients. There's few natural plants along the shoreline, and the average spring total phosphorus is on the order of 7 micrograms per liter. And one of the problems with all of these lakes is that number is encroaching to the point where it just keeps growing and growing from year to year. And it's the most important area to look into, because as you increase nutrients, you make the lake more hospitable to invasive species. So for uninfected lakes, we're looking at the detection and rapid response requirement. And that's where I was coming at with the questions I had before. Not so much, I'm assuming that if we monitor the lake and look around, we can detect if we have an invasive species in it, which certainly has to be seconded by DEC. But the point is what do you do then? How how quickly can you respond? And, you know, if you don't respect everybody around, the government agency may not be able to respond as quickly as the local municipality want to. And so is there anything we can do that can be approved a priori to doing anything to put us in a position where we can act quickly and move against this species right away? And then the other part of it is countering an increase in nutrients trends as a priority. So what we're doing is monitoring the shoreline to establish the location and the extent of native aquatic species plants. And that can be accomplished with the volunteers. It's not necessarily what Kim trains people for or what they're intended to do, but this is my take on things. I spent years working with the military on mine countermeasure operations. And so detecting change was something I worked a lot with mathematically and professionally. And so if you understand the environment you're in and you understand what's going on locally around the shores, you're in a much better position to be able to detect whether or not something has changed. It's just a lot easier to find something that has changed from what it was at one point than trying to look for something that you probably would have a hard time recognizing because you haven't seen it before. So that's the concept of going out and locating and looking at aquatic plants running around the lake shores, and then taking that information and mapping it into areas where they're most hospitable or most likely to become infected, like around boat launch areas and outlets of rivers and streams. And you look for change there. The greeter program is your first line of defense, but it has no guarantee. There's no guarantee that you're not going to be infected. And in our case, because of the way the lake is laid out, we have no place that we could put a cleaning facility. You know, we have enough problems getting power and phone to a greeter shack and running that program because the access is owned and operated by Fish and Wildlife. They're very generous in letting us use it, but there's no way we're ever going to be able to put a cleaning system in around our lake. The other thing that has come up and is a great concern to me are wake boats, because they have ballast tanks and they intake water from all over wherever they've been in the past. And when they come to the lake, they intake more water and mix it with what's remaining in the tank, which can't be inspected. And so it's sort of an uncontrolled rate, regardless of how good the breeder program is, of introducing invasive species into the lake. And it's an area of concern. I have no problem with people enjoying themselves, and I promote that on the lakes, but this is something that it can be quite troubling, and something that there's no way within the breeder program to counter. So sort of in conclusion, where we're getting our funding sources from. So for a rapid response plan, it's probably going to be funded through the Lake Association membership and fundraisers. We do a big ice out contest every year here, which is very profitable. And the Lake Association has built up a nest egg of money in anticipation of trying to do something. Unfortunately, those funds, although they're extensive, are nowhere near the amount of money that Dave is going to talk about next. Our shoreline patrollers are funded by volunteers, and typically we're not doing that much. I mean, I'd like to see more, but typically somewhere on 42 to 50 hours a week of volunteer time for swimming the lakes, and looking for invasive species and documenting what's there. Countering nutrient trend increases, we're using the watershed management programs, and that's funded through DEC and volunteers and reclassification efforts. The Essex County Natural Resource Conservation District, this is another area where they play quite an important role, is managing that program through DEC. So that's the money that Amy pushed to the lake is being monitored through that group, and I'm feeling very confident that they're going to do a great job there. Very similarly, the Lakewise programs are funded through DC, but again, the money is flowing through the Essex County Natural Resource Conservation District. And again, there we have a very skilled person that's familiar with the lake, and they've done a lot of work in terms of shoreline programs to minimize the influx in those areas. And then the lake monitoring program is funded through DEC, all of the laboratory work required to monitor nutrients and build up a evaluation of where we sit. The greeter program, 50% through the state, another 50% through the town. our town has on every year. We just put it on the warrant every year, and they donate $1,000 to the lake to be used as we want to do it, but it's basically for the breeder program. And then the Lake Maidstone Lake Association matches that, and then we bolster it with the volunteer hours. And that's basically how we move through the process. That's all I have to share right now.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Our last speaker is Dave Johnson, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So, Dave?
Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story that goes back over a decade on Lake Dunmore and Fern Lake. And one of the association members who was a big part of this story was Jay Michael, who is on this call. And if we get questions, maybe Jay can help me out answering some of those questions. Lake Dunmore is about 1,000-acre lake, and Fern Lake is about 70 acres. And milfoil was detected in these lakes in the late 1980s, and was handled for 15 years or so with just volunteers hand pulling. But we faced a crisis about 10 years ago when the milfoil populations began to grow exponentially. And you can see that in the curve here on the bottom left, in both lakes, actually. And so it became a real financial burden. We had to hire crews, we had to outfit suction harvesters, and it just looked like, even despite our best efforts, we couldn't keep things under control. And you can see on the bottom right here how these efforts were funded. But as has been mentioned, the funding, public funding that's available is limited, and because similar things were happening in all around state and many lakes, it was not clear that public funding was going to be able to keep up with our needs. So Jay and others on the lake decided that faced with this problem, they really needed to find some other sources of funding. And what they decided to do was to hire a professional fundraising firm to put together a fundraising campaign. And they set some goals that you see here. And over the next couple of years, they mobilized a large number of lake property owners around the lake to help with this effort. First, there was an education campaign, and then there was a pledge campaign. And they got good support from local businesses. And this campaign is just about to end. And since its inception, it's raised over $2.4 million from a very large number of donors. The expenses involved in this campaign were less than 10% of the contributions. And I'm sorry, since that time, when they started getting contributions, this endowment has provided $750,000 or so of operational funding for milfoil prevention, or for milfoil control and AIS prevention. And last year, this fund provided about $66,000 toward current operations. So where does this put us with milfoil? Well, you can see here, I've extended that time now to the present, and with a combination of herbicide application and continued milfoil harvesting crews, we've been able to greatly reduce at least the amount of milfoil that's been harvested. And our crew tells us that the amount of milfoil in the lake is also much, much lower than it used to be. And our costs, although they're still significant, are starting to come down. And you can see here now how the endowment funding combined with, it's still critical for us to get state and local funding, but at least the endowment funding has helped us to keep up with the need and to stabilize the overall funding picture so that we have some hope of being able to continue this control. And so in conclusion, in this situation, we were successful in rallying our members to address a clear threat. These endowment supplements, as I said, can stabilize these AIS prevention and management funding and compensate for fluctuations in need and in public funding. And we're also considering using some of these campaign funding that's available to address other challenges faced by the lakes, like the one that Chris mentioned with increasing phosphorus. So if you have more questions about this, feel free to email us at this address or ask your questions here today. Thanks. Glenn, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Dave. You've done a remarkable job on fundraising over there, and it's should carry a lot of years. Okay, at this point, looks like we have about a half an hour left over. We're doing good on time. We'll open up to questions. And Chris, if you want to start with the chat box, and then we'll jump over to Beth. She's got a question.
I'm kind of an empty bucket over here. The chat box doesn't have much in it right now. There's a couple of comments that Chris Cano had made, Kimberly Jensen, but no specific questions that come up right now.
Okay, then we'll go to Beth. She has her hand up.
Hi, Glenn, thanks. I had a question about if anybody has any potential solutions for vector lakes that are located in different towns. The one I'm specifically thinking about is Lake Memphremagog, which has 4 invasive species and 4 access areas in 3 different towns. Currently, there's no breeder program to speak of, and the local group is a watershed organization, not a lake association that doesn't have deep pockets. Because there aren't any breeder programs, the Watercraft go unchecked and uneducated to spread invasive species throughout the region. And so there's no real, I haven't been able to see any solutions or funding opportunities and things that we've discussed. It's certainly not the responsibility of the other regional lake associations or programs. So where does that go? Where does that belong?
Somebody want to take that?
So that's an Oliver question. I hate to put him on the spot. I certainly don't have anything to say.
Well, Beth, thanks for the question. I don't have a great answer. Memphremagog is a priority lake between the TMDL, the starry stonewort, the zebra mussels come south, and then all the recent hubbub around PFAS being detected in Canadian waters and the work we did this summer on PFAS analysis. And then the Casella pretreatment permit is there in the background. A lot of focus and attention on Memphremagog. It's disappointing to me as a Lake and Pond program manager for the state that we aren't able to do a better job implementing our breeder program on Lake Memphremagog. And it's disappointing and therefore a challenge for us to try to resolve that our breeder programs at a couple of key access areas aren't what they should be. I'll just put it that way. What do we do about that? I guess I would reach out to you and the folks in the MWA, and we could convene a meeting to think about what are the possible solutions to this. Is this the lack of a municipal or local partner? Is it the lack of funding? Where the grant and aid funds, by the time they get to this particular group for this particular access area, are so limited that they can't get things done, or is it something else? and see how we can beef up one or more breeder programs at the key access areas. As you said, it's a vector lake, gets a lot of use. You have lakes in the watershed, not that far as the crow flies, which are free of invasive species, but may have that boating, interplay where someone's on their boat on Seymour Lake or Shadow Lake one day and then on Mbra the next day. So it's a threat that needs to be addressed. I'd be happy to, I'm sure Kim would as well, to chat with you and Mbra Watershed Association and the other stakeholders. And we've had trouble up at Mbra over the years with, other than Mbra Watershed Association, who are great, we've had trouble getting some of the volunteer work done. More recently, folks have stepped up, but there was a while where we didn't have a lay monitor. That's now fixed. But, I think we have an opportunity to improve our outreach, talk to municipalities if necessary, and see what can be done about this. I'll stop there, but thanks for raising the issue. And if you like, we can set up a meeting, after today, to talk about how to breeder program up on Mbra, and if the representatives up there can be apprised of the situation and can poke DEC to do a better job, that's always helpful as well, because then I get it from the bottom and the top, and it makes it easier to prioritize resources accordingly.
Yeah, I know Meg's got a question, but I think Kim may have something to add. So, Kim?
As was mentioned in the chat box, Jennifer Hopkins with Mbra Watershed Association has done a tremendous job. She's a regional partner for us up there in that Northeast Kingdom area. We have spoken to the municipalities. We have spoken to folks. We've led several VIP events up there. We've done as much as we possibly can to stir up the support in that community, but there's not political support for any type of projects up there. So it's really unfortunate. And Jennifer has really been an awesome advocate and proponent for projects at Mbra, and she has just been met with the lack of support from the municipality. So that's where we're kind of at with that.
Thanks, Kim. I understand all of that also, and it's difficult when you have 3 different municipalities in one lake. Nobody wants to take responsibility. So one would think that that would be something that would be more regional or related to the state in this situation particularly.
Yeah, again, we have attempted to corral folks for that support, but we're, it's hard for us because we don't have the political support, and it's also a very depressed area. So they have other issues that rise to the top of the town plans.
Okay, then now Meg.
I'm going to drop an optimistic vision thought here, which is thinking more holistically about the state of Vermont and thinking about, Beth, other water bodies that may serve as a threat, but may not have resources to protect it, or water bodies that are oligotrophic and have no invasive species present and are really worth investing resources in to protect because they don't have anything yet. I really can't stress enough how important it is that the state of Vermont has pivoted, thank you, Kim, to having this WISPA survey application. Not only is it easier for everybody to collect data and it's consistent, if we can continue to collect data through this process, then the state has all of this invasive species data at their fingertips. And once we get about 5 years of data, we can start looking analytically at where are we seeing the most invasive species coming and going from or to, and where was the last body of water visited, so that you can create a more prioritized list of water bodies that we call invasion spread hubs, that have invasives present that are spreading to uninvaded water bodies, but as well looking at those water bodies that are high conservation need, meaning they're pristine and preserved. And, eventually I hope we get to the point where the state can provide some guidance on priority lakes for stewardship and decontamination, regardless of the amount of energy lake association dollars behind them. It would be a more prioritized list looking really at the data to drive regional spread prevention of invasive species between these bodies of water.
Thanks, Meg. And I can tell you from experience at Seymour that, well, I can't tell you the exact percentages, but I'm going to say close to more than 3/4 of our confirmed invasive intercepts come from Lake Memphremagog. The rest are from Lake Champlain. There's a few from Willoughby. Thanks for your answers. And I will set up a meeting with Oliver, and Jennifer has done a great job. Thanks.
First, I saw a question come through about wake boats. I know there's a couple people who would love to add something to that. So, Chris, if you want to read the question.
Okay, I mean, I guess there was James Hoagland asked what if you could define a wake boat, and Christine came back and said a wake boat is a powerboat vessel which by design or modification has one or more functional ballast tanks that brings water in and out of the lake. So when they go in and try to work it, they suck water out of the lake, and before they leave the lake, they discharge it so they don't have to. But so you're mixing a lot of things that are in the lake in this ballast tank. The ballast tank is closed. It has bags, compartments, and containers, plumbing, hull devices, and other similar devices of similar design to increase the displacement of the vessel. Otherwise, it affected for the performance of enhancing and increasing the wakes while under power. So the wake that it generates is certainly, I think, a big concern. But I mean, here in AIS, I think the bigger one that often isn't associated with wake boats and represents a major concern is the fact that they're taking in ballast water. I mean, if you look at the history of the Great Lakes, that's how they became contaminated by tankers coming in and exchanging ballast water in the lakes. And it's inevitable that it's going to happen as these boats move around the different lakes. And the concern I have with a lot of this is that the control of these boats is often pushing the boat off of shallow regions and lakes that are smaller and pushing them into other areas that are perhaps more remote. And consideration isn't being given in doing that as to whether or not the lakes are affected. That to me should be a priority. I don't know if that was a question or just a statement.
No. Yeah, I don't know, Jack or Dave, you have anything to add about wake boats or?
They are a real danger with AIS, just to emphasize that point. You cannot empty their ballast. You cannot inspect them. It's been proven scientifically that they carry infectious, maybe that's not exact word, but invasive animal and plant species from lake to lake. And I guess in my view, it's not, what's being done with wake boats is not wholly consistent with what the Vermont statutes are for the transport of invasive species. I know there's a debate about that, but it seems to me that we're knowingly letting this happen. And all of what we've talked about today, the great expenses of these programs of managing and preventing, we're just at odds with what's happening with wake boats. I will tell you that there is an H503, which has been posted in the House to bring up this issue of wake boats. And I'll also tell you that there's a group of concerned citizens, of which I'm one, that is about to submit a petition to the Agency of Natural Resources to ask that these be managed. And this document will contain at least our best scientific evidence to support what we're saying here about AIS and about the other problems that wake boats present with erosion, personal injury, property damage. When I think of Vermont, I do not think of wake boats. And I hope that Vermont may become the first state of 17 states that have tried to enact management so that we're successful.
Yeah, this was my question, this is Jim Hogle, and these boats differ from a standard boat with an outboard motor in that they deliberately pump water into the hull to increase the displacement. Is that true?
Yes.
And so what would these boats be used for? Is it typical something that is done by water skiers, waterboarders? We're on a very small lake, and we're trying to regulate, actually outlaw the use of outboard motors altogether on the lake, except for our milfoil harvesting operation. And I guess I don't know if we have wake boats or not that have ever been on the lake. We rarely have motorboats, and as far as I know, they're mainly just a sport fishing boat that is used to get around the lake in 2 minutes rather than 10.
Well, they have these ballasts. It doesn't sound like you've ever really seen one of these, but they go very slow, and people do at least two sport activities. One is called wakeboarding, and that's like you do with water skiing, but they go slower, create large wakes. And the other is wake surfing, and that's where you don't even need a rope, where you create such a huge wake behind your boat that you go hands-free and you hang 10 on these little Vermont lakes. That's what we're, this group that I mentioned and this legislation is seeking to ask the ANR to manage. I'd be glad to have you get in touch with me. I can tell you more details, but I think that may be enough for now.
I think that's answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I would interject that, for Echo Lake in the towns of Sudbury and Hubbardton, which I believe, Jim, is the lake that you're speaking about, you're already sort of protected from wake boats because operation of vessels at speeds exceeding 5 miles per hour is prohibited. So I don't think anyone would bother to bring a wake boat to that particular water body, and jet skis are prohibited as well. We had some correspondence about this back in September of last year.
Yeah, we had, for the first time, we had 2 boats out on the lake. One was rather apologetic. The other one was rather confrontational about being allowed to run an outboard motor on the lake. Both were going in excess of 5 miles an hour. We're working on it. It's just difficult to get all the property owners on board to say all the guests that bring boats on the lake need to adhere to these rules.
Yeah,
and I don't know how to
briefly. What we're doing on use of public waters rule is making the rules more readily available through different apps, including a Fish and Wildlife Outdoors Vermont app. And also we're going out to every single access area, state and municipal. Those that do not have the blue and white metal signs that state what the specific rules are for that water body, we will be printing and putting up new signs on the access area kiosks. We'll see how long they last, but hopefully having those signs there and the rules more readily available will help you explain to confrontational boat users what the rules are. And finally, what both those 2 boaters did is a violation, and it can be reported to either the State Police Marine Division, your local law enforcement, or DEC's environmental enforcement officers. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, it looks like we have 2 more questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. Martha Winston. Martha?
Okay, thank you. I had to unmute.
Okay.
Meg referred several times to something called a WISPA survey, and I may be the only one, but I'm not quite sure what the survey is. What is the data they're collecting? Is that something that we as the public should be looking at, or as lake associations? Is that helpful to us in any way right now, or is it something that will be helpful in years to come? I'm not quite sure what that was she was referring to. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Sorry. WISPA, Watercraft Inspection Survey Data Application. It is, if you are funded by the state of Vermont now, required that you collect your boat launch steward data through this application, which sends the information in real time well, not in real time if you're connected to the internet, but it sends all the data to a cloud. Because in decades past, you're out there with paper and pen writing down the information, and then you have to transcribe it to Excel, and then you have to send the Excel forms to the state, and hopefully they get them all together. It was a big headache. So now we have an application which you can run off your phone, you can run it off of an iPad, you collect the data in the field, and then you connect to the internet, and it sends that consistently collected data with the same drop-down menu responses to the state of Vermont. That's been implemented in the state of New York for quite a number of years now. It's really critical. It is available to you. Kim can talk about it. We have worked really hard to make sure that the information New York is collecting is comparable to the information that Vermont is collecting, because it all matters. These boats are going back and forth and in between.
Right.
Kim, do you
So
want
it's
to
the
add
sur-
anything?
It's the survey 1, 2, 3, basically.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. I just didn't know it by the other name.
Got
All
it.
right. Thank you.
The only piece I was going to add, I had my hand up, is that we're not lost on ballasted boats here, because in places where they are allowed to be used, the boat launch stewards are trained to prioritize, and they can't see inside those ballasted. They're like big bladders, right, that sit inside the sides of the watercraft and weigh it down and create this beautiful wave behind the boat for water skiers, wakeboarders. You don't have to go fast to get it when you're ballasted, meaning when you have the water fully in them. But what we can do with decon stations is we have the hot water, and the hot water is going to flush out anything that's there and kill it. So we don't have to be able to get inside to see it. If we know it's there and it's been used, we'll prioritize flushing those bladders out with hot water, and that will reduce the risk of transport of invasive species. So if they're not addressed, and those ballasted tanks, typically people don't want to trailer full ballasted bladders. It's going to cost a lot of gasoline to move those watercraft on trailers from one water body to another. So the owner is going to try and drain them as much as they can. There is residual that will be left in those ballasted bladders. So if you have a watercraft launching into your lake and you have the ability to flush it out, even with cold water, even anything to do to flush it out will help reduce the risk that something might be left in your lake. But primarily they're trying to take water in, not dump it out in your lake. We're just trying to minimize the risk of spread of that residual water. And we do that pretty efficiently by hooking up a hose to the ballast tanks and flushing them out.
Yeah, I was just going to add also that it's important also to know when the last time the last water body was launched from, or retrieved from, I should say, because if that ballast water has been sitting around for 2 weeks or even more than a few days, most likely whatever animals that are in that bladder are no longer viable. Of course, that could be different for small fragments of starry stonewort or some other smaller plants that could plant or could survive and plant. But I think the animals issue is less so.
You're muted, Glenn. Glenn, you're muted.
Sorry, Chris, we have about 5 minutes left. So if you want to ask the last question, I think Jack wants to make a closing statement. So we'll wrap it up here and still be on time.
So Christine wanted me to just read something that she put in the chat box, which concerns so I'll just take it to there. She states that the Fablab Legislative Committee is concerned about the potential wakeboat activities generating large enhanced wakes and their potential impacts on public safety, lake environment, shorelines, ecosystems, wildlife habitats, and especially the profound issue of potential AIS spread via wakeboat ballast systems that cannot be cleaned. Vermont Bill H.503 seeks the Agency of Natural Resources to regulate the operation of wake boats on public waters of the state. And there's a whole a linkage there that you can look at in a PDF document if you're interested in stating it. I guess the other comment I have is just that all of this idea about washing out the ballast tanks and heating them is a good approach, but I'm not quite sure it's been proven to work. And the other piece of that is what do you do when you don't have a area where you can wash your boat out? You know, you're an uninfected lake. There are no facilities that are allowed to around you to support any kind of cleaning station. Yet these lakes are very attractive for the use of wake boats. How do you manage that situation? It just doesn't, and it's illegal to knowingly transport these things. And I think until you can conclusively prove that by hot washing you've eliminated the chance of doing this, it's of concern and remains of concern. And that's my point back to you.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank all the speakers today, and I'm going to hand it over to Jack for a closing statement. And here you go, Jack.
Okay, well, on behalf of our ad hoc Fablab AIS Water Quality Committee, I'd like to thank the audience for showing up today and for listening. I know I've learned a lot. I'll tell you, it was a lot of fun in putting this together. I'd also share with you that our AIS ad hoc committee, one of our goals has been to try to deliver to lake associations and individuals practical things that are timely and useful to you. And we hope that we've done that today. As Dave and others have mentioned, our plan is to have one on invasive patrollers. So, you know, some of the things we'll certainly want to get Meg involved if and when we do this, but we really welcome your comments in the comments bar when this meeting closes, and I hope you'll take a few moments to do that. So once again, thank you everyone for attending. I hope you found it a benefit and can apply this. And if you have questions, please share them with us. So thanks everyone. I appreciate it. And I think we can just conclude now unless anyone else has any final statements. Perhaps Pat does on behalf of Fablab.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Glenn. I want to thank all the speakers as well, and thank all of you for coming. And once again, thank all of you who are working so hard in your many different capacities, and so many of you volunteering so much time and effort to protecting our lakes and ponds in the state. It's a huge amount of work, but I think there's been some great ideas discussed today. And I hope that we can carry some of these ideas forward, continue to discuss and find ways to implement some of the things that have been talked about. So I'll just add in terms of wake boats, if you take a look at the Fablab website, you will see the Fablab Board of Directors statement of concern about wake boats and about the issues that have been raised. And we are closely following the legislation that's been introduced, as well as the petition that's going to be submitted soon. So please also let us know your concerns, things that we can either help with from the statewide federation point of view, or areas that we can continue to follow from the legislature. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jackie, for getting this organized. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Hey, Oliver, you have something to say real quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge the work that Kim Jensen does. As I mentioned in my presentation, we're down to one full-time equivalent. And so there's lots of volunteers and lots of towns and associations working very diligently and long hours to reduce the spread of aquatic invasive species in the state. At the top of that, at least for DEC, is Kim managing a team of temps, getting funding out to the many different lake associations and municipalities, and bringing all these other federal dollars in and making sure that we spend every last cent as productively and effectively as possible. So we're a bit of a skeleton crew. Hopefully that'll change. But Kim's work is legendary and very, very effective. So I just wanted to thank her for her work. And finally, you know, the funding situation can improve. You all have done that in the past. And I think we had a great meeting on aquatic invasive species funding with the Lake Bomazine Association and their lobbyist in late December with the DEC commissioner. And I think that laid out some of these issues about how the funding's plateaued. So I think the timing is good now for us all to work together and try to get this issue on the agenda, be it through the decal bill, be it through other means, to try to take a run at over the next year or two, increasing funding available for this work. Thanks.
Okay, there should be a survey you can fill out when you log off. And once again, thank you everybody for attending and have a good rest of your day. So long.
Thanks all.